The grand concert hall shimmered with golden lights. The audience sat in perfect silence, waiting for the evening's performance. On the stage stood a famous pianist, his polished shoes tapping lightly against the wooden floor. He smiled with arrogance, his eyes scanning the crowd for amusement. Then he saw her, a simple woman seated in the second row. Wearing a modest dress and clutching her small handbag nervously, the pianist smirked, his voice echoing through the microphone. "You there?" he called, pointing toward her. "Come, play something for us." Laughter rippled through the crowd. The woman's cheeks flushed red, her hands trembling as she rose from her seat. She walked slowly toward the stage, her footsteps heavy against the carpeted aisle. The pianist stepped aside with a mocking bow, gesturing toward the massive grand piano. The keys gleamed under the spotlight. As though daring her to touch them, the audience whispered among themselves, their voices filled with disbelief. The woman lowered herself onto the bench, her breath quick and shallow. She placed her hands above the keys, fingers hovering, unsure of where to begin. For a brief moment, the hall grew unbearably silent. Even the pianist leaned closer, waiting for her humiliation. Then she pressed the first note. A deep, resonant sound filled the air, vibrating through the hall. Her fingers moved with a strange confidence, striking chords that carried both sorrow and beauty. The mocking smiles in the audience began to fade. Eyes widened, mouths parted, bodies leaned forward as if pulled by invisible strings. The pianist froze, his grin slipping into a tight, uneasy line. The melody rose and fell, wrapping the hall in an intensity that shook the air. Each note seemed to pierce the silence, echoing against the golden walls like a confession. The woman's face transformed, no longer timid but illuminated with passion and strength. The audience's laughter turned to gasps. The famous pianist's hand twitched nervously at his side, his pride crumbling with every note she struck. The woman played as though her very soul poured into the instrument. The hall seemed to breathe with her, live and trembling under the weight of her music. The pianist shifted uncomfortably, his polished shoes tapping again, this time out of unease. The audience no longer looked at him. Every eye was fixed on her. And then something happened that no one had expected. Asterisk. The chandelier above began to sway ever so slightly. The air inside the hall thickened, as though the music itself bent the space around it. The woman's hands moved faster, striking the keys with impossible precision. Notes cascaded like a storm, filling every corner of the vast hall. Some members of the audience clutched their chests, overwhelmed by the sheer force of sound. Others leaned back in their seats, eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. The pianist took a small step forward, his jaw tightening as if he wanted to stop her, but his feet refused to move closer. The woman's melody grew darker, heavier, as though pulling secrets from the air. The walls seemed to vibrate, the golden decorations quivering with each chord. The audience felt it too, an invisible weight pressing against their skin. The pianist's face turned pale, beads of sweat forming at his temple. His hands twitched, but he dared not touch the piano again. The woman's music had taken complete control. Her eyes glistened, reflecting the stage lights, but she did not look at the audience. She seemed to be staring into something far beyond them, something only she could see. The final note of her rising sequence struck so powerfully that the chandelier above rattled, crystal fragments trembling. Gasps echoed through the hall as everyone looked upward in terror. But the woman never flinched. Her hands kept moving, pulling the room deeper into her unexplainable performance. Asterisk, the chandelier shook harder, glass droplets clinking like warning bells. A low vibration rolled beneath the wooden stage, making the piano itself hum as if alive. The woman's fingers blurred across the keys, weaving sound that felt less like music and more like command. The audience could not look away. Some covered their ears, yet the sound still pressed through. Entering their very bones, the pianist staggered back, his polished shoes scraping against The stage floor, his arrogance was gone, replaced by raw fear. The woman's face showed no strain, only a strange serenity, as though she had waited her entire life for this moment. Then, with a sudden shift, the melody twisted. The notes became sharp, cutting like shards of broken glass hurled through the air. The audience winced. Their breaths caught in their throats. The grand chandelier above groaned, its chains straining as though ready to snap. Children in the back rows cried out. A man shouted for someone to stop her. But no one moved. It was as if the entire hall was trapped. Suspended inside her music, the pianist pressed his palms against, his ears, eyes darting wildly toward the exit, yet his body refused to leave the stage. The woman leaned forward, her fingers pressing harder, faster, unleashing a sound so fierce that the floorboards beneath the piano began to crack, and then the hall went black as the light suddenly died. Only her music remained, echoing through the darkness like a storm with no end. Asterisk screams erupted in the pitch-black hall, the sound of chairs scraping, people stumbling, and frantic whispers filled the air. Yet above the chaos, the piano continued. The notes glowed faintly, each keystroke releasing a shimmer of pale light. The audience froze, caught between terror and awe. The woman was now a silhouette, her outline bathed in the strange glow rising from the instrument. Her hands never faltered, moving faster, as if guided by something unseen. The pianist stood paralyzed, his face washed in the eerie light, his eyes wide with disbelief. The music swelled.
Ow!
No longer just sound, but a force that pressed against every chest, rattled every bone. People tried to shout, but their voices vanished beneath the weight of the melody. The woman lifted her head, her eyes reflecting the glow of the keys. They were no longer the eyes of a timid stranger. They were piercing, endless, almost inhuman. The air turned colder, a sharp chill creeping across the hall. Breath became visible, swirling in front of every mouth like smoke. The piano roared with sound, thunderous and unrelenting, until it felt as if the walls themselves might collapse, and then one by one, the audience members fell silent. Not because the music stopped, but because they could no longer move. Asterisk, the crowd sat frozen in their seats, Badi's stiff eyes locked forward. Their faces were pale, their mouths slightly open, as though the music had drained the breath from them. The hall that once echoed with whispers and laughter now felt like a tomb. Only the relentless flood of notes filled the air, wrapping tighter around the room like invisible chains. The chandelier above finally gave way. With a violent crack, it tore free from the ceiling and crashed onto the rows below. Shards of crystal exploded across the floor, scattering like stars, but not a single scream escaped the audience. They remained still, unmoving, trapped inside whatever spell had claimed them. The pianist stumbled backward, falling to his knees. His eyes darted from the fallen chandelier to the woman at the piano, his lips trembling as he tried to form words. The woman did not look at him. Her fingers pressed harder, dragging out a deep, earth-shaking chord that seemed to rumble from beneath the stage itself. The floor vibrated. Dust rained from the ceiling. The grand piano itself appeared to pulse, as if alive, as if breathing through her. The woman's head tilted back slightly, her mouth parting as though she were silently singing along to the impossible music. Her shadow stretched unnaturally long across the wall, twisting and bending in ways that defied the light. The pianist crawled toward the edge of the stage, desperate to escape, but his legs refused to lift him. The woman's music held him too, and in that moment, he realized with absolute dread that she was no ordinary woman. Her presence seemed to swell, filling the stage until she appeared larger than life. The glow from the piano keys flared brighter, casting the hall in waves of shifting light. Her shadow towered against the golden walls, bending and twisting like a figure that did not belong to her. The pianist's heart pounded violently in his chest, every beat a drum of panic. His throat tightened, but no sound came out. The woman's hands moved with impossible speed. The music no longer resembling any human composition. It was chaotic and beautiful. It's terrifying and divine all at once. The audience, frozen in their seats, now stared with eyes that glowed faintly, reflecting the same eerie shimmer as the keys. Their humanity seemed to drain away. With every passing note, the woman leaned closer to the piano, her hair falling across her face, her fingers striking with the weight of judgment. The sound rose into a piercing crescendo, shriek of music so sharp it felt like glass shattering inside the ears. The pianist clutched his head, pressing his palms hard against his temples, but the sound was not outside him anymore, was inside. It beat against his skull, against his thoughts, until he felt as if his mind might split apart. The woman's eyes flicked toward him at last, just for a moment, cold, unblinking, and then the keys slammed down in unison, unleashing a single chord so violent it felt as though the earth itself had cracked open beneath the stage. Asterisk. The hall shook with the force of that single chord. Dust poured from the ceiling in thick clouds, choking the air with grit. The floorboards splintered beneath the piano, jagged cracks racing outward, like lightning across the stage. The woman did not move from her seat. Her hands hovered above the trembling keys, fingers spread wide as if she had summoned something that could not be undone. The audience remained rigid, their glowing eyes fixed forward, unblinking. Unbreathing, the pianist fell flat against the stage, his body trembling as if every bone inside him rattled loose. His ears rang, but beneath the ringing he heard something else. A low, guttural sound rising from below the cracked stage. It was not music, it was a voice. The woman pressed another chord, slow and deliberate. The cracks widened, the wood groaning and splintering as if the piano itself were prying the earth apart. The voice grew louder, echoing with tones too deep to belong to any human throat. The pianist's vision blurred, his eyes stinging with tears as he forced himself to look. From the darkness beneath the stage, something stirred, something vast, something ancient. The woman leaned closer to the keys, her lips curving into the faintest of smiles, and with a final, bone-shaking strike of her hands, the stage gave way. The piano and the woman sank into the abyss below. Yet the music did not stop. It grew louder, it grew stronger. It was no longer coming from the piano. It was coming from the darkness itself. Asterisk, the darkness roared with sound, swallowing the hall in vibrations that shook the very air. The audience, their glowing eyes locked forward, began to twitch in unison. Their stiff bodies jerked as if pulled by invisible strings. Every movement sharp and unnatural. The pianist dragged himself across the broken stage, his fingernails scraping splinters of wood. His breath came in shallow gasps, his chest rising and falling like a man drowning on dry land. From the abyss below, a shape began to rise. It was not the woman. It was something far larger, something with countless, shifting limbs that seemed both shadow and flesh. The music poured from it, deeper and heavier, each note vibrating through the bones of everyone trapped. In the hall, the chandelier's shattered pieces rattled across the floor, clinking in rhythm with the impossible melody. The pianist covered his face with his arms, but the sound pushed inside him, twisting his thoughts until they no longer felt like his own. The audience rose slowly to their feet, their movements mechanical, their glowing eyes fixed on the rising figure. The cracked stage heaved as the abyss widened, the creature climbing higher. Its presence filled the hall with suffocating weight, a pressure that bent the air and threatened to crush every lung. The pianist forced his eyes open one last time, and there, rising from the void, he saw the woman seated calmly upon the piano bench. Her hands still moved across, visible keys, but she was no longer playing for the audience. She was playing for the thing that climbed out of the darkness. Asterisk, the thing loomed taller with every passing second, its vast form blotting out what little light remained in the ruined hall, its limbs bent at impossible angles, stretching like shadows that clung to the walls. The ceiling groaned under its weight, cracks spider-webbing across the golden dome above. The woman sat unmoving on her bench, her back straight, her fingers still dancing on the unseen keys. The sound she produced no longer resembled music at all. It was a pulse, rhythm, something primal that seemed to drag the creature upward. The audience swayed with it, their bodies moving as though tethered to the beat. Their glowing eyes reflected the darkness. Their faces blank, masks stripped of humanity. The pianist pressed his forehead against the broken floorboards, tears streaking his cheeks as he prayed for silence. But silence never came. The creature's head rose into view. It had no eyes, no mouth, only shifting ridges and ridges that pulsed with faint light. And yet the pianist felt it looking at him, not with eyes, but with awareness that burned into his very soul. The woman's playing grew faster, her hands blurring with inhuman precision. The rhythm pounded harder, sinking with the terrified thud of the pianist's heart. The creature tilted its head, as though listening intently. The piano bench creaked beneath the woman as her posture straightened, her head lifting slowly. When she finally turned toward the pianist, her lips curved into a smile that was no longer hers. The music did not stop. It was her and it was the thing playing together. Asterisk, the sound thickened, layered as though thousands of unseen hands struck keys all at once. The hall trembled with every pulse, dust cascading in sheets from the crumbling ceiling. The audience swayed harder, their movements no longer human, their bones cracking as their joints bent at unnatural angles. The pianist clutched his chest, his heartbeat stuttering under the crushing rhythm. He tried to crawl toward the edge of the stage, but the air itself pressed him down, heavy as stone. The creature's towering form fully emerged, its limbs stretching into every corner of the hall, filling it with writhing darkness. And still, the woman sat at the center of it all, composed, her fingers striking unseen notes with terrifying grace. Her eyes glowed now, twin orbs of pale fire reflecting the abyss that obeyed her. The pianist forced his gaze upward, his voice breaking into a ragged whisper. "Who are you?" The woman's smile widened, though her lips never moved. The answer came not as words, but as sound, a note so low and deep it rattled the marrow in his bones. The audience dropped to their knees in unison, heads bowed as if kneeling before a god. The creature's form loomed above them all, its chest heaving in rhythm with the music, its shadow swallowing the hall. The pianist's tears blurred his vision as he realized the truth. The music was no longer entertainment, it was worship, and they were all unwilling disciples, bound to its power. Asterisk. The hall seemed to pulse like a living organ, every wall beating in time with the unholy rhythm. The chandelier's shattered crystals rattled on the floor, rising and falling with each thunderous note as if caught in a tide. The pianist's nails dug into the stage, splintering wood beneath his fingers, his body trembling with each vibration that tore through him. He could not escape it. None of them could. The audience bent forward lower, their glowing eyes fixed on the ground, their bodies twitching in perfect unison like marionettes pulled by unseen strings. The woman's hair lifted slightly in the air, as though gravity itself had shifted around her. Her hands never slowed. The creature loomed higher, its limbs stretching along the walls and ceiling until it became impossible to tell where the hall ended and where it began. The golden panels cracked, curling inward like paper pressed to fire. The pianist forced himself to raise his head, vision blurred with tears and dust. The woman was no longer seated on the piano bench. She was hovering just above it, her body upright, her hands still pressing down on invisible keys suspended in air. Her mouth open now, a slow, deliberate motion. But the sound that emerged was not a voice. It was the same impossible chord, the same crushing resonance that had first opened the abyss. The walls of the hall bowed outward, beams snapping as though the building itself could not withstand her song. The pianist screamed, though his voice was devoured instantly by the tide of sound, and as the woman's glowing eyes locked onto his, he felt his body rise against his will, pulled upward by the music, as if he too were becoming part of the performance. Asterisk. His feet lifted from the splintered stage, his arms dangling helplessly at his sides. The sound pressed against him like invisible hands, lifting him higher with every crashing chord. His body shook violently, his bones vibrating as if they were tuning forks caught in the resonance below. The audience rose to their feet in unison, their glowing eyes tilted upward, their mouths opening soundlessly. Their silence was worse than any scream. The creature spread itself across the ceiling, its vast form pulsing with the rhythm, its countless limbs swaying like pendulums. The pianist's breath caught in his throat. As he floated closer to the woman, she hovered just inches above the piano bench, her fingers still moving in a blur, her body stiff as though possessed by the sound itself. Her glowing eyes narrowed, fixing on him with unbearable intensity. He tried to speak, to beg, but his jaw locked tight. Only a strangled gasp escaped. The music grew sharper, stabbing at his mind, filling it with fragments of voices that were not his own. The notes twisted into words not spoken, not sung, but pressed directly into his skull. You will join. His heart pounded so violently it felt as though it might shatter. The audience's heads snapped upward in perfect synchronization, their glowing eyes now reflecting him, only him, dangling helplessly in the air. The creature leaned forward, its eyeless face descending, a mass of ridges glowing faintly with each pulse of sound. The woman's hand struck the keys harder, faster, the rhythm now a frantic summoning. The air split with a final, shattering chord, and the pianist was pulled forward, straight toward the abyss yawning in the creature's chest. Asterisk. The pianist's body trembled as the abyss drew him closer, the sound clawing at his very soul. The audience stood frozen in their trance, their glowing eyes reflecting the void that waited to consume him. The woman hovered in silence now, her hands raised above the invisible keys. For the first time since she began playing, the music stopped. The hall fell into an unnatural stillness. The creature's vast form loomed, its chest open like a gate, darkness swirling within. The pianist dangled in the air, suspended just inches from the abyss. His heart thundered, but no sound came from his lips. And then the woman lowered her hands, her glowing eyes softened, and the faintest trace of sorrow crossed her face. With a final, deliberate motion, she pressed down one last invisible chord. The sound was unlike the others. It was not violent, it was gentle, solemn like the closing of a book. The abyss shuddered, the creature's vast limbs recoiling as the note spread through it. The audience gasped in unison, their glowing eyes flickering before dimming back to human. The pianist dropped to the stage with a heavy thud, his body collapsing against the cracked wood. The golden walls stopped trembling. The chandelier's shattered pieces lay still. The creature writhed, its massive form shrinking, folding inward as the sound pressed it back into the darkness below. The cracks in the stage sealed themselves, the abyss vanishing into silence, and then the woman was gone. Only the grand piano remained, untouched, its keys glimmering faintly under the broken light. The audience sat dazed, confused as if waking from a dream they could not remember. The pianist lay trembling, staring at the silent instrument, his heart echoing with the memory of that final note. A note that saved them, but also warned them, for he knew the music had not ended. It had only paused.